In this how-to, we're going to make these cute candle jars, which are great for tea lights or just pen pots or storage jars. So with all how-tos, you're going to need a few things. We're going to start with a Pritt stick, a thin pen, a thick pen, and a craft knife. You're also going to need a jar, some paper for your stencil, and something to lean on when you're cutting, and some paint. Or maybe spray paint works better, but whatever. There are some other things that I didn't mention in the beginning, like tape, ruler, and maybe a pair of scissors. First thing you're going to do is take a selection of objects and a sheet of paper, which will make your stencils go around the jar, which we'll later cut out and then paint over to make this cute pattern. So just measure up the amount of paper that you're going to need and then cut off the bit that you're not going to use so that your stencil doesn't run over. Now remember to check that everything fits into place, because you wouldn't want to come to it later and then find out that things don't line up. You're now going to start drawing your design. Try and keep it really simple. I've done this sort of floral pattern, and remember that it's not going to come out exactly like it is on the sheet of paper. Now when you're doing this, remember that your lines can't join up or you'll make a hole and your design won't make sense, it will just be blobby. And when you're cutting out, remember to be very careful, and it doesn't matter too much if the shapes aren't exact, because the paint's going to pretty much fill all the gaps. Now when you're cutting out, you need to remember that you're taking out a gap, so go over both sides of the line, and then check that it fits again, and remember that these flappy bits will eventually be held down with paint. I went over them with Pritt stick to make sure they stuck a little bit better, but didn't make too much of a difference. Now I used a little bit of tape to keep the two sides down, and it worked just fine, although there was a bit of a gap that I needed to go over when I was finishing up. Now I just started painting it, just sort of went at it. It didn't make too much of a difference, but it was important that all of the gaps were covered and that I painted both the top and the bottom of the jar as well, although this did make it more difficult when I was picking up and moving it around, so maybe leave a gap at the top and the bottom until afterwards, and then go over them when you're done. Now it's time to remove your stencil. This was really tricky, and I did end up with lots of bits of paper sticking. I think it was the sort of paint that I was using, and I think that if I did it again I would definitely use spray paint or something, because I ended up having to scratch at it and pick at it and even repaint certain places so that the design actually came out a little bit better. This time I'm not going to use paper, I'm going to use tape, and it's going to be a sort of stripes method. It's going to look a little bit more modern and less creative and fun, but in the end it's going to be a much simpler design that the paint's not going to move about as much on. This time I just put some strips of tape down and then I painted over it, and it was super simple. The paint kind of went in the gaps, but I liked the sort of stripy effect that it left underneath, and as you can see with the final pieces, it looks alright, and I kind of like the way the light plays on it. This tape method was a lot like the other methods, so you can just refer back to that if you want to use this one. I then painted the bottom afterwards, which seemed like a much easier thing to do. And that was it. All finished. I just waited for the paint to dry and then popped some candles in them, and they look really great. And I think that the way the light plays with them is superb, and I definitely do this again and use them at parties and things. They look really pretty.